One, two, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hey everybody, welcome to the Sales Hacker Podcast. It is your host, Sam Jacobs. I am the founder of the New York Revenue Collective. I guess we're calling it the Revenue Collective writ large now because we've got London and we're opening Denver soon, so a bunch more cities to come. I'm also the Chief Revenue Officer at a place called Behaveox, and super excited for today's episode. Today's episode features Scott Schnaars. He's SVP of Worldwide Sales at Dynamic Signal. He's a talented and experienced sales executive, and we had a great conversation. Now, first, I also want to thank our sponsors, our wonderful sponsors. So the first is AirCall. At this point, I hope you know AirCall is a phone system designed for the modern sales team, not the antiquated sales team, the modern sales team. AirCall seamlessly integrates into your CRM, eliminating data entry for your reps and giving you, the manager, greater visibility into your team's performance through advanced reporting. You can also add new lines in minutes and use in-call coaching to reduce ramp time for your new reps. The website is aircall.io/saleshacker, aircall.io/saleshacker. Our second sponsor is Outreach. That's Outreach.io, the leading sales engagement platform. Outreach triples the productivity of sales teams and empowers them to drive predictable and measurable revenue growth, which is the kind of growth that we all want. They do that by prioritizing the right activities, scaling customer engagement with intelligent automation, and they also make teams more effective while improving visibility into what really drives results. So go over to outreach.io/saleshacker to see how thousands of customers, including Cloudera, Glassdoor, Pandora, and Zillow, rely on Outreach to deliver higher revenue per sales rep. Finally, want to thank a couple of fans that have been talking about the podcast on LinkedIn, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a few, but a couple people. First, Jay Cronin, who really got a lot of value out of the John Barrows episode. Thank you, Jay. Matt Poe reached out to me. Robert Doyle reached out to me and said, hey, great podcast. And then James Brett just posted about the Todd Capone episode just as of today. It's September 14th. You're probably listening to this in late October, so you're traveling back in time with me right now. But James, thank you very much, and thanks to Todd. Todd's got a new book. If you haven't bought it, it's called The Transparency Sale. It came out October 9th. Make sure you get one and make sure you listen to the episode because he's great. And without further ado, let us listen to my interview with Scott Schnaars on the Sales Hacker Podcast. Hey, everybody, it's Sam Jacobs. Welcome back to the Sales Hacker Podcast. I'm incredibly excited today to have as my guest Scott Schnaars, who is SVP of Worldwide Sales at Dynamic Signal. Scott's a longtime veteran of the sales industry and of startup land, and we're going to chat with him about his background, his experiences, and all of the ways that he helps build great teams. So, Scott, welcome to the show.
Sam, it's great to be here. Thank you very much.
We're excited to have you. So for those, let's just, we do the baseball card thing at the very top of the show so that we understand your background and a little bit of context. So your name is, did I say your name correctly, by the way, your last name?
Absolutely. It's like cars and guitars.
There you go. Cars, guitars, and Schnaars.
Yep.
And you're SVP of Worldwide Sales at Dynamic Signal. Tell us about Dynamic Signal for those not in the know.
Sure. So Dynamic Signal is a company that is a SaaS organization, of course. We've been around about 8 years. And our real focus is on helping large organizations, think your Fortune 1000, helping them communicate to their frontline workers, workforce communications. One of the things that I think people in technology tend to forget is that most employees don't get a laptop and a hoodie and a phone and a nice notebook on their first day of work. Most employees are given maybe a 15-minute, here's what you have to do with your job, and they go off and they go do it. And these are the people who actually keep the economy humming. These are people that work in hospitality, they work in manufacturing, they work in healthcare, they work in janitorial services. All of these people are helpful employees to these large organizations, and in a lot of ways they make up the entire company. But historically, organizations have had a hard time communicating with those people, and we make a platform that makes it really easy to communicate to those people on the supercomputer that everybody carries in their pocket.
Wow. And so how big is the company from, what's the revenue ARR range? You don't have to tell us specifically.
Yeah, so the company is about 300 people, and I've got about 35 quota-carrying sellers who are doing an enterprise quota-carrying quota. So I think that the listeners can sort of figure out what the revenue range is based on that.
Okay, cool. And then a little bit of capital raised, or just where are you in your funding stages? It sounds like probably pursuing some IPO event at some point or something like that.
Yeah, from your lips to God's ears, as they say. I think that we've raised about $100 million as an organization. And most recently, earlier this year, we raised about $45 million from Cisco, Microsoft, Adams Street, and Deutsche Telekom.
Wow. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
And so let's quickly get a bird's eye view of your organization. I think you mentioned some of the numbers, but walk us through sort of both the sales organization and then the functions. I'm imagining, the traditional SDR, AE, but walk us through all of the different roles that you've got.
Yeah, so we have, like I said, we've got about 35 quota-carrying sellers. I've got 3 groups who are in the U.S. They're made up of a corporate team that is focusing on any organization between 1,000 and 5,000 employees. I've got an enterprise sales team that is focused on any organization between 5,000 and about 100,000 employees, and a strategic accounts team that's focused on anything with more than 100,000 employees. And then I've got a team based in London where they have about 5 quota carrier sellers there. We've got a team of 9 or 10 solution consultants. So these are the people who are helping to design what the implementation might look like. They're helping to design any kind of launch and rollout plan and really helping the sellers achieve their quotas. Various sundry of sales operations, sales enablement, people to help the team to really hum. And then our SDR team actually rolls up to our marketing team. We've got about 50 SDRs. So we're trying to keep it a little bit higher than the traditional 1-to-1 ratio. And when you think about like the companies that we sell to, that sort of Fortune 2000 or 5000 or Global 5000, whatever you want to call it, an ABM marketing strategy really works well in that capacity. So it makes it easier to have the SDR salesperson team really get laser focused on just a handful of accounts.
That was actually going to be one of my questions. So, and partially this is selfishly because we're sort of figuring out some of the structure here at Behavevox, but the enterprise team, when they sell, is it hunters and farmers, or it's like, they get the accounts, once they close the account on the first sale, they maintain the relationship so that they can continue to expand the account? Or is it a designation between new logos and existing logos?
So we're going through a similar kind of transition. I just recently, within the last 2 or 3 weeks, hired our first, call him a farmer, if you will, but I'm excited to have him on board because now that we're to a point where we have 500 or so customers, we want our sellers to go out and get new logos. We want them to be focused on the upsell. And oftentimes that juggling routine doesn't quite work out the way that you want it to as a sales manager. So we've hired one person to come in and really pick 25 or 30 existing customers and see what they can do with them and really start to drive the revenue at those accounts.
Yeah, that makes sense. The issue sometimes that I have is if you're going to spend, it depends on your sales cycle length, but if for us it's like 12 months, and so if you're going to spend a year getting to know somebody, it feels strange for me sometimes to then immediately remove that person, meaning the salesperson, from the equation. I like to continue to sort of try to develop that relationship, but it's entirely dependent on the sales cycle.
I agree. And we're in a similar kind of sales cycle where it's 9 to 12 months. And when we look at these accounts that are maybe 2 or 3 years old, and in some cases they've just been neglected by the seller that closed them originally, or maybe not even necessarily neglected, but the seller is focused on closing a different deal with a different company, or we've moved one seller out of the organization and given them a new opportunity somewhere else, and we need to just figure out how do we manage and maintain these existing customers who are really valuable, and I think that there's a strong opportunity to make them more valuable.
Yeah, I agree. So let's figure out your origin story, your humble beginnings.
Yeah.
Where are you from? And, the key questions, I think, for a lot of the audience, or at least for me, because I'm just interested in this stuff, are because there's no real place to get a degree in sales, a lot of people come from very different educational backgrounds and find their way into sales. So how'd you get into sales, and how did you become, a top executive, part of the executive team at a company that's probably going to clear 100 million in ARR and is on a great path? How did all that happen?
So like a lot of your guests, Sam, I come from humble background. I grew up in a very small town outside of Philadelphia and wanted something more. And it was interesting. Like that seems to be a common theme of a lot of your guests. I got a little bit of a taste of it. My grandfather was the #1 life insurance seller at Prudential from after World War II up until the early 70s. And had a spectacular career running a team and an office there and did very, very well. And I went like, wow, I want to do that job. At the same time, and we can have a longer conversation about nature versus nurture at some other point, but I love technology too. My grandparents got me a Trash 80, a TRS 80 computer when I was probably in the 2nd or 3rd grade, and I started to learn to code on that, and that's how I got the technology bite. When I was in high school, I sold office equipment, and I was really good at that. I would go door to door and just knock on people's doors and say, hey, do you want a cash register? Or do you need a copier or a fax machine? And as it comes out of my mouth, I'm really dating myself. And I did very well at that as a kind of part-time job. And then in college, I took a job selling home improvement. So I would drive around and knock on doors in residential neighborhoods and try to convince people to put a new roof on their house or to put new siding on their home. And I got to tell you, I was absolutely horrible at that job. I got fired in about 6 months.
Well, one thing is that you've been working the whole time. I mean, I'm always something I just have a lot of respect for people that, I mean, it sounds like you've been grinding it out even when you were in school for a long time.
Oh, yeah, you have to. So after I got fired from that, I took a job where I was doing upsell for infomercials. So when you would order, you see an infomercial on television and you call the phone number, I was the guy that was answering the phone, and I would either sell you additional packages of beauty supplies, or I would sell you insurance on your treadmill, or whatever it might be, like whatever the script said to sell. And I did well at that. And then my living situation changed a little bit, and I needed to get an apartment on my own, and that job wasn't paying the bills. And I accidentally took a job selling software. And I was working for a software reseller in Philadelphia and did very, very well there. And a company called Borland, who at the time was based in Santa Cruz and was the third or fourth largest software company in the world, called me up and said, we have a job for you in California. If you want it, it's yours. And I jumped on a plane and went to California and never went back. And I worked there for about 4 years and started to get a little bit of a taste for management, where they would make me a team lead. And then I ran a team of 5 inside sellers. And then went to work for WebEx. I was the third salesperson hired at WebEx back in 1999, and still have a copy of my original Active Touch before they were even WebEx paycheck. That was a great run for us. We grew that team very well and went through the IPO there. And I ran a team of about 20 people. I went to work for a company called Starfish, and Starfish made a modem for Motorola phones. We sold that company to Motorola, and then after I took some time off, I went to work at Yahoo. At the time, Yahoo had an enterprise sales team, and I went to run a West Coast team for Yahoo Enterprise. And immediately after me joining, the CEO and COO of Yahoo came to us and said, we shouldn't be in the enterprise software business. This was a bad idea. We're going to shut this business down. I liked working at Yahoo. It was a great experience, and I stayed there for about 5 years after that and was really just hustling around trying to find any job that I could find at Yahoo. So I went from enterprise sales. I was one of the product managers for Yahoo Messenger. I got
was Carol Bartz the CEO at that point?
Way before Carol. Before Carol. So it was right when Terry Semmel joined.
Oh, wow. Okay,
yeah. Terry Semmel joined, and then Dan Rosenzweig joined, and then me. I was third in that lineup, and they probably still couldn't pick me out of a lineup.
Terry Semmel was like the first big celebrity CEO that they hired when they were sort of trying to figure out what chapter 2 was going to be. Is that, if I'm not mistaken?
Exactly. And I think that Terry ran into a lot of weird political things as he was trying to turn it into more of a media company versus a search company. And I think it was hard for him to get a lot of the people in Sunnyvale to make that shift.
Yeah, I understand.
So, but it was cool. I felt like I was getting an MBA because I got to do sales, and I got to do product management, and I got to do ad sales. And my last job there was on the M&A team, where I got to help do M&A integration with a lot of the old Web 2.0 companies that now when I look around and I kind of see Instagram, I'm like, well, that was sort of Flickr before it was Instagram. And I look at Twitter, and that could have been, Delicious should have been Twitter. And all these companies that we were, I think Yahoo is just ahead of the curve there, but I learned a ton, and it was a great experience. And then I joined a company called Badgeville and helped the team there grow their revenue. Badgeville moved me to London. I ran their European operations there, came back to the US, and Mark Schuster and Jason Lemkin introduced me to a really cool company in LA called Retention Science, where I ran their sales, marketing, and customer success for a year. And it sounds a little bit spoiled, but my family just didn't like living in Santa Monica. It was, the Bay Area is home for us. And for my kids, their friends would fly down or they would fly up on the weekends. And then everybody would disappear, and then you kind of go into this other weird life. And it was just close enough to taste it, but it was far enough out of reach that you didn't have the normal life that we had back in the Bay Area. So we moved back to the Bay Area a year later and lived on the same street that we lived on before we moved to London, and it was great.
That's awesome.
And then 3 years ago, I joined Dynamic Signal, and it's exciting because I really do believe that we're changing the way that large organizations can communicate with the vast majority of their employees who traditionally they've had to communicate with via signs in the break room or paper newsletters. And one of the things that's really exciting about this company is, for the most part, every customer that we have, you've heard of, right? It's not a kind of a smaller SaaS company that's selling to online retailers that may or may not be around in a couple of years. Dynamic Signals customers, JP Morgan Chase, or a large logistics company, or Oracle, or Cisco, or these companies just aren't going to go out of business anytime in the near future, which kind of gives an extra layer of safety to the overall organization.
Yeah. And do you sell to HR? Like, who are you selling to?
So I'm going to a meeting on Monday at a large retailer. They have 30 people coming to this presentation, and it's people ranging from communications. So the comms people tend to be the main driver of this, but HR is one of them. Legal is, of course, one of them, because communicating to hourly workers is oftentimes a tricky thing from a legal standpoint. We've got a COO that's coming to the meeting, so because that's the person who really cares. How do we communicate out to all these 35,000 employees? We've got a lot of IT people who are coming. We've got some of the field managers, so like a region, like a district vice president type of role. So the wedge tends to be communications or HR, but then it very quickly spreads out from there.
Yeah. And is the ROI the employee retention, employee engagement leading to greater productivity, in addition to probably like, hey, you're regulatory, like you're legally required to provide, this helps fulfill regulatory or legal requirements around employment?
Yeah, you're hired. You've nailed it.
There you go. So what would it do if I could change, employee engagement 5% across 100,000 workforce? This is why it's, $1 million a year or whatever.
Yeah, we had a client recently who told us that for every point increase in their employee net promoter score, they see a 0.5% increase in top line revenue.
Oh my! That's a great stat for the CHRO or Chief People Officer.
Yeah, it's or the CEO or the COO, and I think that people, especially in this day and age where communications amongst your friends and amongst your peers and amongst the news, like you're getting so much information that people just expect a level of transparency that I think a lot of companies don't give their employees yet. But we're seeing now that a lot of companies want to be able to do that, and they want to share what's going on, and they just haven't had the ability to do that in the past.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you for that background. I have a couple of questions specifically related to the background. One of them is, you've been doing this a while, and not only have you been doing it a while, but you've had consistent success. WebEx IPO'd, Starfish was acquired by Motorola, you were part of Yahoo. So my question is, what keeps you motivated? Like, what keeps you fired up to jump back in and do this thing again of building sales teams and, hitting a revenue number and the grind of it? Like, what is it about this Is it the career? Like, what are the things that are driving you every day?
Both of my parents were entrepreneurs. My mom ran the office supply store that I worked for in high school. My dad is a machinist and tool maker. And, I've always grown up building things. I build furniture as a hobby at my house. So I love the idea of taking nothing and building it into something. And I think that the opportunity now at Dynamic Signal, when I joined, it was 5 people and now it's 35. Like now I'm looking at, okay, like how do I continue to take this piece of clay that we've molded into the half shape that I want it to be? And I feel like there's still a lot of molding left to do here. I just love building things and fixing things. And that's just kind of something that's in my DNA.
Yeah, no, it's a very common, it's a very human, it's basically, it's a long-winded way of me saying me too. It's, the feeling of having nothing exist and then something exist, whether it's a process or a client or a team, just can't be beat.
No, it's so fun.
You mentioned nature versus nurture. I guess when you're thinking about the elements of your personality that you think have led you to be successful, and or conveying that out to the rest of the community, what do you think are the most important skills or qualities in an exceptional salesperson?
I would say empathy is number 1. Curiosity is certainly number 2. Then you take that empathy and you take that curiosity and you start to transition that into, okay, well, how can I help solve a problem for somebody? Then, of course, like just the ability to ask for money, I think is number 4. But I really do think like if you are a curious person and you ask smart questions and you can be empathetic and put yourself in somebody else's shoes, I think those 2 things go a long way. And it's one of the things that I often coach younger sellers, whether they're on my team or elsewhere, is these people have a lot of stuff going on in their lives. And it's, they're not just sitting around going like, oh, you know what, I got to get on this dynamic signal contract. Let me just run this all over the place and sign it. Like, these are large companies, and large companies have big problems. And I try to coach people like, if you work for a company that has 100,000 people in it, think about a town that has 100,000 people in it, and the company probably has the same problems. And your head of comms and your head of HR are probably dealing with bigger things like that. So, right now you've got Hurricane Florence coming into South Carolina, and I want my rep in the Southwest to do well this quarter, but it would be a very selfish thing to just call that person up and go, hey, before you guys evacuate, can you hit that DocuSign button for me?
I mean, you could do it on your phone. So on the road, like, come on. I mean, I understand that your town's flooded.
Right. And I think it's so important to be able to put yourself in the shoes of the people that you're working with to really understand what matters to them and how can you make them successful if they want to be successful. And if they don't want to be successful, well, okay, what's the other motivator for you? Is it to not get yelled at by your boss? Or is it to, if you hit this project, you're going to get this bonus out of it, or there's a promotion out of it, or whatever, whatever it might be? Just really understanding that and trying to really grasp what it is that's important to that person. And then, keep digging into that and asking more questions about it and helping to understand what's going on there.
I think intellectual curiosity, it's the fundamental,
the
root of everything in many ways.
And then your question, like to your, is it nature versus nurture? It's probably nurture. I was very lucky. Again, my grandparents were very affluent and kind of took me around all over the northeastern seaboard to see museums and to see orchestras and to see symphonies. So I got to experience that kind of lifestyle. So I got very comfortable dealing with people there. I had my parents who were the builders, so I got to experience that and just kind of the melding of those two things, kind of that curiosity and that ability to build has kind of led to where I am today.
Yeah. Those experiences, those formative experiences, for whatever the reason that you got to experience them, whether your grandparents are affluent, et cetera, they're so important when you're young. One of the things
it was part of the reason we moved to London. I wanted to be able to give that experience to my kids.
Did you like London?
Oh my God, I'd move back in a heartbeat. I absolutely loved it.
What's the difference, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but what's the differences, the key differences when you're building sales teams specifically that you notice between London and the States?
Europeans are less pushy is the big one. I think that there is European culture is a little bit more passive. I was in Spain once, and the person I was talking to said, you Americans are crazy. You work so hard during the best parts of your life, only so that you have a little bit of money to not be able to spend it in the later parts of your life. And I was like, okay, that sums up the European experience pretty well. They're just not as driven by my experiences. There's less quarterly pressure. There's less kind of pressure to hound people. There's just overall less things will happen when they happen versus how do I kind of continue to push and drive this thing as hard as I possibly can.
Yeah, we've got offices in London with my company, and I guess our CEO just moved from London to New York, and he said, I like New York. It's more transactional. People like to do deals here. Yeah, which I think is interesting. One of the things that we were talking about offline, you said no salesperson has ever had a bad call. Tell me what you mean by that.
Oh, that's just something that I've always found funny. Like if as a sales manager, when you ask somebody about, they always come rushing into your office and they're like, oh, hey, I just had the best call with so-and-so. And you're like, well, why was it a good call? And it's like, oh, well, we talked about their kids and our kids play soccer together. And we talked about the 49ers and what's going on there. And it was just such a good call. I'm like, well, are they going to give us some money or what's going to happen next? Or, oh, well, I haven't figured that out yet. But they're really committed they're so committed to doing this project. And I just I got to the point where I said, I don't want to hear about your good calls anymore unless there's a clearly definable next step action item to it.
You guys are at Dynamic Symbol. It sounds like an enterprise sale. So do you use a methodology? Is there a process? Are you using MEDDIC? Walk us through your sales cycles. Just give us an overview of how you progress a deal through your stages at Dynamic Signal.
The average deal size is about $150,000 a year ARR. We've got a half a dozen or so clients that are paying us well over $1 million, and a bunch that are paying us under that $150,000 mark. But that's kind of the number. Our average sales cycle from like a really qualified opportunity to close is about 6 months. Sometimes they last a year and a half, and sometimes they go really, really quickly. And, again, there's lots of different forces that impact that. We do use Medic. We were running a sales methodology that a guy called Skip Miller created for us, and it was a great model. And then we changed our business a little bit and changed our messaging a little bit. So we've continued to kind of tweak and adjust things in terms of what the process looks like. I don't think it's too much different than any other SaaS process, but we're constantly looking at, okay, what are the best sellers on the team doing, and how do we make that a lot more repeatable? And then can we inject that into a process? So one of the things one of my head of enterprise discovered when he got here, he immediately picked up on something that should have been very evident to the rest of us, and that is, if you don't have a senior leader, CEO, COO, SVP of something in a meeting by about your third meeting, that deal's never going to happen, essentially. So we went, you're 100% right. We looked at all the data around it. We said, okay, you have to have that senior leader in a call or in a meeting by the third conversation. Else, otherwise we're just kind of spinning our wheels on this opportunity. And let's push it back to the SDR team and have them nurture that. So that's an example of that. But let's get the opportunity from the SDR. Let's qualify it. Let's qualify it some more. Let's figure out if we're the right selection. And if we are the right selection, let's go through the legal process. We're not doing brain surgery or launch missiles or anything here. It's, we're selling software, and it seems like it has been more or less the same process of selling anything with minor tweaks, for the, existence of time.
Yeah, no, you're right. The benefit of, again, to your point, whatever you call it, whether it's Medic, my friend Dave Govan, they call it at Hitachi Medical. I think we're going to do something at Behavox called MedPicar.
Okay. Medic. Do you use Fox? Did you have Medic Fox yet? That's one I used a couple of jobs ago.
What does the FOX stand for?
The Fox is just the Fox is the person that's going to come out of your deal at the end and bite you in the ass and kill your deal.
That is probably the CEO or COO or something.
Well, or it could be like one of the things that our Fox in our deal tends to be IT. So we recognize, hey, if IT always has veto power. So get IT involved in your deals earlier. Let's not go through a 9-month sales cycle only to get to the end and have the IT guy go, well, you never ticked a bunch of boxes for this, and we don't approve it, and you've got this other thing that's kind of like that, and it blows everything up. So let's call that guy out early and make sure we can do something here. Yeah,
I mean, the benefit of whatever the acronym is, it's just a to-do list for the salesperson.
Yep, 100%.
So, okay, go out and answer this question, go out and answer that question, and those are the questions we know need to be answered. So one question I have, you're running a big team, it's growing quickly. When you think about success or failure in your role, what are the biggest drivers?
So obviously revenue. And as we grow and continue to scale the organization, the type of revenue becomes a lot more important to me and to the organization. As an example, we've noticed that accounts that are under a certain dollar threshold have a much higher propensity to churn. And probably at the beginning of 2019, we're just going to put the foot down and just say anything that is below this threshold, we're just not going to do that deal. So either keep your deal above that or walk away from it as fast as possible. The time to value on a particular deal. So is the CAC right? Is the LTV right? Can we get this done faster? That whole thing is how do we look at overall client success and making sure that, anybody can go get $100,000, but can you get $100,000 that turns into 300, that turns into $1 million over the course of 3 years? And that's, as I start thinking about the deals that we're doing today, that's really what I'm starting to look at and how I'm measured on that. And then the other ones are around retention of employees. Are we doing the right development of the employees? Are we giving them the right training? Are we putting them on the right career trajectory? I always like to understand not so much what does your next job look like, but what does your next job look like? And how do we make sure we're putting the people on the right path to get to that next step in their career?
I'm going to ask you a highly tactical question.
Okay.
Because you've done this. So when you think about your dashboards, when you think about the readouts and the metrics that you are refreshing every day. So obviously CAC to LTV, what are the 5 or 10? Give us some metrics that you're looking at on a very regular basis to give you overall, obviously you're looking at revenue, but what else are you looking at?
So what I'm looking at is more, and this is super tactical, I'm really looking at overall activity. So These are the kind of deals, again, people get distracted. Not everybody has a hurricane coming through, but they've got their own metaphorical hurricane that's coming through their office. So I'm constantly looking at activity and are people staying on top of these deals? And I feel like if somebody shows up to your house with a big bag of money and says, hey, I want to give this to you, Sam, like you should be able to take that. But if somebody says, hey, if you jump through some of these hoops, there might be a big bag of money at the end of it. I want you to kind of continue to probe that. So I'm looking at when was the last activity? When's the next step? What was that last activity look like? Are we getting to the IT person? Are we getting to a C-level person? Like how big is the next meeting? How many people are involved in these conversations? All of those things tend to lean towards a better deal for the company. If I talk to a seller and they say, hey, I've got this $150,000 deal, but I've only talked to one person inside of the organization, I'm going to be really skeptical about the reality of that deal. Whereas if I talk to a different seller and they say, hey, I've got this $300,000 deal and I've talked to 4 people on the HR team and we've got 5 people from comms and I've met the CEO and the COO of the organization and IT has blessed it and we've got 12 or 15 people who are involved in making this a success, that's going to be a good deal for us. Probably not unlike a lot of SaaS companies. Like the churn when it happens oftentimes tends to happen because the champion who actually bought the software got fired. So it's really important that we've got more than just Joe in communications or Sally in IT as our single point of failure there, that we've got a good army of people who are there supporting this program.
If let's say your seller has a really good meeting, 4 people, they say, let's set up the next meeting, but calendars don't line up. It's 3 weeks from now. Are you saying, well, between now and 3 weeks from now, let's figure out a way to sort of nurture all those different relationships and drop them some value and maybe get, how are you maintaining the intensity?
100%. 100%. They have to stay on those things. And it is hard to get 4 senior level people from 4 different departments in the room at the same time, especially, we're just coming off of summer, both trying to schedule 4 people in the same room in Europe at the same time is damn near impossible. So, that nurture part of it is so critical. And it's, the nurturing is a little bit different for each role. Like IT is going to get nurtured a little differently than HR, than comms, and an executive. But we absolutely want to stay on all of those people during that time.
Yeah, I agree. So it feels like a lot of the emphasis very traditionally is on sort of, value-based selling, but you were sort of mentioning that, you think proposals are a waste of time. You don't want to demo too early. Walk us through a little bit of your thinking around how to make sure that, I guess, there's the right level of equality perhaps between you and the prospect, or what the motivation is for not sending proposals, for example.
I have a lot of crazy beliefs that a lot of people don't necessarily agree with, but oftentimes all beliefs are crazy.
Well, obviously we want to hear them now.
So my feeling on proposals is that most time when you tell somebody a number, they're going to disappear. It's very rare that you go, hey, send me a proposal, and I spend an hour putting together like a fancy document and I send it over to you. And then like you call me immediately and you're like, oh my God, hey, Sam, I'm so ready to buy this thing. I sort of feel like rather than sending a proposal, like when you're ready, I'm just going to put together a contract and send that over to you. And, the cost of this is $12,000 a month. And if you want to buy it, great, let's work on a contract. If you don't want to buy it and you need to go budget it, go write down $12,000 on a Post-it. But I don't want to spend lots and lots of time on something that's just going to end up in the bin. And I get, and oftentimes I do here, I'll throw another weird belief at you. I think that salespeople tend to use proposals as a crutch when they haven't sold the value. And if you haven't sold the value into anything, like your proposal is just going to get looked at as a number. But if I can convince you that my solution will generate $10 million a year in savings and you're completely bought into that $10 million, as long as my proposal doesn't say more than $10 million on it, you will likely buy that because you're going to get a machine that when you put $1 in the top end, $10 falls out the bottom end. People are too quick to rush to a proposal without figuring out that value. Maybe that's a better way of articulating it.
Well, I actually don't think it's that controversial, or at least, okay. I guess I agree with you. And I've seen exactly your point. Salespeople like it because it's work. So it feels like I'm doing something and maybe it helps me, but it doesn't really help. So what would you say when somebody says, okay, Scott, it's been great. This is great. Just send me a proposal.
I actually say I don't send proposals. And I realize that's a little bit standoffish. What I say is, I send contracts. I'm happy to send a contract to you, and if you can sign it and send it back to me. But
And
I
I'll
also
say,
don't.
well, we're not ready for a contract yet.
Okay, which I appreciate, Sam, and I wouldn't expect that on the first call. That would be a weird thing if you were ready to buy something. But I think if you're looking for a number to put into a budget, I think you can write down $12,000 a month is probably a good range for a company of your size.
Oh, well, that's actually there. So you did provide, at least you answered the question without giving too much, I guess.
One of the guys on my team actually answers the question in maybe the best way I've ever heard, and he does it so consistently and so well. He'll say, typically for your company your size, it's about $150,000 a year, plus or minus 50%.
That's awesome.
It's such a great way to provide a ballpark without providing anything that's really measurable or accountable.
Right. It's a little bit of just please fuck off for now.
Yeah. But also, and you deal with this at your company, if somebody is asking for a number that quickly, they're clearly a commodity buyer that doesn't appreciate value, and they should just go to the low price leader of whatever it is industry that you're selling into and buy that, because if they're so keen on how much does this cost early on in the relationship, they're just not going to care about whatever value that you do, and any sales process that you go through is likely going to be a waste of time, because it's so hard to convert a commodity buyer to a value buyer.
You're absolutely right. I mean, we had this situation here a couple of weeks ago where, sort of like a tire kicking exploration, and they said, send us over your pricing. And I didn't want to do it, but I didn't consider it a sales cycle or an opportunity, but I also was thinking in the back of my mind, well, if they ever do get around to buying, it would be nice if they had some information, but we ended up not sending them the pricing information is the answer to the question.
And I think that there's ways that you can tease it a little bit to figure out, are they a commodity buyer or are they a value buyer? Just by asking about what other things have you purchased and what is the value that you're getting out of that, and how do you see people using that inside of your organization? And you can start to tease that out and figure out if they're a value or commodity buyer. And if you're trying to build a value-based sales process, you should just ignore all of the commodity buyers and weed them out as fast as possible, because otherwise it's going to, all of that stuff that we were just talking about with time to value and CAC and LTV, that gets kind of continuously driven down. And I think there's a space in the SaaS market for a second place value leader. Not everybody buys Salesforce. There's people that buy the low price leader in CRM. They're not a bad company. They're not Salesforce, but they're out there.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, to your point, one of the biggest things people say about ineffective or bad sales practices is holding on to opportunities that you're going to lose way too long.
Yep.
Probably directly related to what you're talking about.
I did a talk recently called Kill Your Darlings, which is a famous literary expression about writers fall in love with the character, or they fall in love with a sentence or a paragraph that they've written, but it's not 100% relevant to the overall message of the story that you're trying to tell. So it's hard for a writer to kill that character off. Similarly to salespeople, I've built that relationship with that person, and I've talked to them about their kid's soccer game, and I've had so many great calls with them, but it's never going to turn into anything, and we just have to be honest with ourselves and kill these things.
Absolutely. We've got a few more minutes. Walk us quickly through the list of things that you believe others don't believe, because I think it's a great list.
I don't think that demos sell. I think too often salespeople are like, oh, hey, they want a demo. Let me show you everything that we can possibly do under the sun. And they go through every bell and whistle and knob inside of their experience, and they try to show everything off. And really what most people want to do is have a business conversation. Again, most value buyers want to have a value conversation, but they want some proof that what you're selling actually works. And I think that you can show that in 3 to 5 minutes, and you don't need to show everything. At some point, you need to show everything to somebody who is using it. But even in most cases, you don't need to show everything. And I see too often salespeople that what should be a 7 or 8 minute demo turns into a 40 or 50 minute demo. And people just get bored of that shit. So that would be number one. I believe that you can't sell over email. I think email's too easy to ignore. People get 200 emails a day, and it's impossible to get through all of them with any kind of reasonable amount of time. Just pick up the phone and call these people. If you've got a good relationship and you want to sell to them, don't list your whole pitch in a long ass email. Most people aren't going to read your 2,000 word email that you're putting together for them. So just pick up the phone and call them and have a conversation. And too often I see I'll give this pitch over email. No, just pick up the phone and call them. You have a relationship with these people, and they want to talk to you. If they really want to buy software, they will answer the phone, or they'll call you back when they see your number. I think that this one might be, my team's going to be pissed, but I think that most people can push harder I talked to some of the team at Gong yesterday, and I think that they've got a great leader in Ryan over there and a good team. But one of the stats that they have is that it used to take 6 or 7 contacts to get somebody on the phone or to connect with somebody, and now it takes 14 or 15. And that's a doubling of that in less than a decade or so. So I do think like people can push a little bit harder. And it's amazing, like when you just say, hey, can you help me out? Or hey, can I ask a favor of you? Or hey, could you do this for me? Like when you ask it like that, like it is pushy, but it's not belligerent. And I feel like if people are getting kicked out of 1 client per quarter, they're pushing about the right amount. If they're getting kicked out of more than 1 client per quarter, they're pushing way too hard.
That is a great stat. That's the price of admission for this podcast right there.
All right, there we go.
The last few questions, and this has been awesome. I've got a super tactical one that I did not prep you for.
Okay.
Your policy on LinkedIn requests. Are you I need to know every person specifically, and I manage a tight network. How do you view connecting with people on LinkedIn?
I tend to fall into that category, and my one brush with celebrity, early on when he founded the company, I spent some time with Reid Hoffman. He came over to Yahoo to talk to us about why LinkedIn is important and why a corporate social network or a business social network is important. And somebody asked him that same question. He said, I only accept invitations from people whom I know and that I've worked with in the past. I've tried hard to maintain that policy, but I do have a lot of lumped in people.
Fair enough. I'm the opposite. I accept all requests, and I know very few of the people in my LinkedIn network, sadly.
But it's hard because then when somebody's like, oh, hey, Sam, I saw that you were connected to Scott. Can you make an introduction there? And you're like, well, I don't really know Scott that well, so... Or do you just like blindly send them off? Like I know people that do that too. I get like hey, Scott, you and I met at some conference that you spoke at in some weird place 1,000,000 years ago. Can I introduce you to my friend Joe? And it's like, that's weird.
I don't get that request as often as I would think that I would.
Okay.
But if I do get it, no, I say, no, I don't really, I know that I laugh and I say, listen, I know they're a first connection, but I have no idea who that person is. And I'm sorry to tell you. What we like to do is sort of like at the end is sort of pay it forward a little bit. And that's where we like to ask, who are the people that have inspired you? Who are some of your favorite VPs of sales or CMOs or other great leaders that you think we should know about?
So I got a couple. So Ryan Longfeld, who I just mentioned at Gong, I've gotten to know him recently. He's a super sharp guy, really seems to know his stuff and would be a good conversation. Abe Smith, who's the CRO at Cision, great guy. Ryan Azus, who is I think he's still the CRO at Ring Central or VP of Worldwide Sales. I'm not sure what his exact title is. Super stellar guy. Greg Brown is one of the best VPs of sales I've ever worked with from Blackhawk. Kevin Gaither down at ZipRecruiter, if you've ever worked with him, man, that guy's phenomenal too.
All right. That's awesome. And then any like great books, if we want to, I think at some point I'm going to put together like the Sales Hacker podcast reading list because we get so many great recommendations. But what are some of the books that have really inspired you or that you're just reading recently that you think we should pick up?
So there's a couple. So one that I got introduced to maybe a decade ago from a friend of mine. She recommended this book because it was all about preparation. And it's something that I'm really passionate about. Whenever you're on a call or an interview like this, or you're going to give a talk or anything like that, preparation is so critical. And she turned me on to this book called Shadow Divers, which I try to read probably every 2 years. But it is about a group of divers, deep sea divers, who find a German U-boat off the coast of New Jersey. And this is a true story. I think they're making a movie about it now. But these guys dive down, and it's most of the book, they go on these 60-minute dives, but they spend weeks and weeks and weeks preparing for this 60-minute dive because they're 250 feet below water. Everything is so critical, and you have to be so careful and so perfect about everything that it's a really good insight. And what I gleaned from the book was how important preparation is. When you have a big event that you've got to go to, whether that's a big client pitch or whether I'm giving a talk and I'm going to be on stage somewhere, or I've just got a meeting with my boss to go, prepare for a board meeting. Like just how important that preparation is to be successful. Great book.
I love that. That's awesome.
And it has nothing to do with sales at all. It's just like this fascinating story about these guys that are diving, looking for sunken treasure, because there's a lot of old ships off the coast of New Jersey, and they find this German U-boat that, in 1944 or whatever, got very close to the New Jersey shore, that you can dive down to it. Pitch Anything by Oren Klaff, I think, is a great book. It's one that I listen to on a pretty regular basis. I like Influence by Robert Cialdini. I think it's one of the better books in terms of.
Is that how you pronounce his name?
I have no idea.
I love that. I hope that's.
I hope it is too, but I have no idea.
I feel like that's the right way. I'm gonna.
What's crazy is I have it on audiobook, and it's one of those books I probably listen to every 6 months or so because it's a pretty quick read, and you can do it in a week of commuting, or I can do it in a week of commuting. And he says it, and I still don't know how to say it.
Well, that's fantastic.
Jack Trout's Power of Simplicity is just like it's all about just like how can you take stuff out of whatever you're doing to make it more simple for the audience. And it's really just about kind of dumbing it down just so that you have the most important message there, right? If it takes 20 words to say it, can you say it in 10? If it takes 5 slides, can you do it in 3? Like, just how do you just break all that stuff out to get to the really important stuff? When I do books, I try to do a business-related book, a fiction-related book, and a non-fiction-related book in sort of that cycle. I thought Bad Blood was awesome.
It was awesome. It's crazy.
It's totally crazy, right?
That's crazy. What's the guy's name? Sonny? You know, her friend or whatever. Just, I don't know, man. It's one of the things that's just shocking about the world is how far liars can get. Hopefully they're caught at some point, but just you can go a long way because people are generally gullible.
Well, the crazy thing to me, not only that, but like, what did those people talk about when they got home at night? Like they had 1,000 employees there. Like, you go home to your wife or your husband and they ask you, like, what did you do at work today? Like, do you just lie? Like, did they all lie about it? Or did they think they were working on something that actually worked? Or that's what I don't understand about the whole thing.
Well, one of her strategies was to keep it so compartmentalized that you never got the gestalt. So you thought, well, maybe my thing is, challenging, but maybe the other teams are, working effectively or something like that.
That's so nuts.
Yeah. Scott, I feel like we could talk for a while, but we're at the end of our time together. So the last thing we want to do is, because Dynamic Signal is growing, you guys are hiring. What is the best way? You have account executives that are listening to this right now.
Yep.
So how can they email you? How should they get in touch with you to the point of LinkedIn? What's your preferred mechanism for outreach? Email
scott@dynamicsignal.com. Twitter is always a good one to get a hold of me. I'm just at Schnaars, SCHNAARS. LinkedIn is fine, although I probably won't accept the request. I'll certainly reply to the email. That's pretty much, those are the best ways, I guess. That's fantastic. Scott, thank you very much. Congrats on all the success at Dynamic Signal and over the course of the career. Thanks for all the book recommendations. And it's really great chatting with you. And if you're ever in New York, drop me a line. Would love to, Sam. I appreciate the time today. Thank you. Thank you. Hey, folks. It's Sam Jacobs, founder of the New York Revenue Collective and the host of your favorite podcast, the Sales Hacker Podcast. And this is Sam's Corner. We talked about a bunch of different things with Scott Schnaars. I really enjoyed speaking with him. And here's a couple tidbits. The main one I would encourage everybody to sort of focus in on, hone in on. The act of sales is not the act of taking orders. And it is not the act of providing information requested in sort of a one-way unidirectional relationship. It's not send me a proposal. Okay, here's a proposal. What's the price? Here's the price, right? It is the act of discovering whether the prospect's pain, whether their interests and priorities are aligned with the value that your solution can create. And the way that you do that is by having an engaged business conversation where you ask lots of questions. And it needs to be an equal conversation. You're not just, they may view you as a service provider or a vendor, but that's not how you should view it. You should view it as an interaction of equals. John Barrows has this thing where he has a give to get scorecard. Scott talked about proposals are a waste of time. Don't give them full pricing when they ask for it. But the context is, you need to qualify their interest around value before you talk about the specifics of the purchasing cycle. And the people that are just, hey, it's the first phone call. What's the price? Send me a price. Send me a proposal. Hey, you're not going to send me a proposal. I don't know what your problem is. I'll just go to the next vendor. Those people are probably not going to be valuable buyers anyway. So you have to qualify them out of the pipeline. And holding on to those people is often the mark and the hallmark of an ineffective salesperson. So when someone says, send me a proposal, take a step back and say, hey, I'd love to send you a proposal, but tell me about the process for typically buying things. Let's confirm that you're interested, and maybe let's have a conversation with a few other folks. So just be careful about how much information you give away, and try to have a more structured discovery process that creates a relationship of equals. So that's been my
One more revelatory insight from your favorite person, Sam Jacobs, but let's also thank our sponsors. So this episode, as always, was brought to you by two sponsors. That's AirCall, your advanced call center software, complete business phone and contact center, 100% natively integrated into any CRM, and Outreach, a customer engagement platform that helps efficiently and effectively engage prospects to drive more pipeline and close more deals. Now, to check out the show notes, see upcoming guests, and play more episodes from our incredible lineup of sales leaders, visit saleshacker.com and head to the podcast tab. You will find our podcasts on iTunes or Google Play. And if you enjoyed this episode, as I see many people doing, please share with your peers on LinkedIn, Twitter, or elsewhere. If you want to get in touch with me, you can find me on Twitter at Sam F. Jacobs. We're heading into election season, or we're in election season. Again, politics, the views are my own. Don't at me if you don't like my politics. I'm sorry. And then LinkedIn, we'll keep it professional on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Sam F. Jacobs. Reach out to me. Thank you so much for all the support. And this has been Sam's Corner. Thank you so much for listening.